Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real pleasure today to be joined by Oisin Hanrahan. Oisin, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin maybe by asking you to share a little bit about who you are, your background, what you're involved in. So over to you, Oisin.
For sure. Great to be here, Simon. Thank you so much for hosting such a great podcast. Or hopefully this one will be great. The other episodes you've got are great for sure. My background, I'm originally from Dublin, from Ireland. I worked on a bunch of things after college, spent a little bit of time in real estate development. And then I moved to the US to go to business school, moved to Boston, did a year at business school and dropped out to start Handy. And Handy was, or is, Uber for handymen and cleaners. So we built that business to a reasonable size. Sold it to a company called Angie's List. Angie's List is the largest home service marketplace in the world. And after I sold it to Angie's, I actually took on the CEO role at Angie as well. Rebranded that business and built it for another couple of years until the point where it was quite a large operation. It was 7,000 people, a couple of 100,000 contractors on the platform, doing well over $1 billion and a half of revenue. And at the end of 22, after nearly 12 and a half years in home services, I decided to take a break. I stepped down from Angie and took a little bit of time off and tried to figure out what I was going to do next, and started another company. So most recently, we started a business called Keychain. Keychain is about helping brands and retailers connect with manufacturers. So we're rebuilding the global manufacturing supply chain, and we've only recently started that business. We've raised about $18 million of capital. We got about 50 folks working on it, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll bring that business to life with a launch. So yeah, that's my background briefly.
Well, it's a whirlwind tour, and you made that sound very simple, but I'm sure that was a lot of long nights, a lot of hard work. And just help me understand though, because you mentioned like Handy, for example, when you got into that was like a 10-year sort of time frame that you were involved there. But how did you get into that? And why that area? Because when I think back to 2011, 2012, maybe when you started that, the internet was quite a different place. AI didn't exist, but it was sort of like a community thing. You were bringing people together. Why did you get into that is basically my question, Oisin.
Look, I think you hit on something in that question, which I think gets lost a lot. The time that you're in has a huge impact on what you do. So, you think back to 2011, 2012, and it's so different to the 2024 we're in now. Like, you think like, oh, well, it might have been a little different, but it was actually substantially different. Like today, we talk about having a labor crisis. We talk about not having enough talent. We talk about not having enough people to do work. Back in 2011, 2012, unemployment rates were high, like really high. And there was, we were out of the depths of the GFC, the global financial crisis of 08, 09. But the economy was not booming by any stretch. It was not at a place of rapid growth. It was not at a place of full employment. And that's just in core, US, metropolitan areas. Like you think about what unemployment rates look like in more rural suburban areas. You think about what unemployment rates, like I remember the conversation about the youth unemployment rates in the Mediterranean being, unbelievably high. And, in addition to that, you think about the technology that was being adopted at that time. Like the iPhone was still newish. Like that was the world we were in. And we were watching these companies get built, and the two that were getting built around us at the time were Airbnb and Uber, but they were very nascent. Like Uber was just like this concept that, wait, I'm going to press a button and a car is going to show up. Will I get in the car? Will I not? the idea that you'd book an Airbnb um, and stay in somebody else's bed sounded crazy at the time. Like it was like, wait, what's going on? Like, and it was, it was rough around the edges. Like I remember using Airbnb in 2010, 2011, it was, to come over to New York. And I remember staying in an Airbnb up, I think it was like described as the Upper West Side, but I think it was like well into Harlem. And I remember, knocking on the door and the description was wrong, and I'd gone either the description was wrong or I'd made a mistake. Probably I'd made a mistake, and I'd gone to the first floor instead of the ground floor, or vice versa, or something. And I was knocking on this door, and I was trying to get in, and the door opened when I knocked on it, and I walked in, and I was like, wait a second, am I in the wrong place? Like, what's happened? And I walked into the Airbnb and I put my bags down, and then somebody else came home, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, I mean, actually, I've just basically broken into somebody's house, and I was like, I was on the wrong level. But like, that was the degree to which Airbnb was like still trying to figure out life and trying to figure out what it was doing. Um, and you put all those pieces together, and we thought, look, if people are going to do these things, if you take a view that people are going to book transport online, you take a view they are going to book accommodation online, what's to say they won't book other categories? And home services was one that I understood. Had been in real estate and construction before. Like, what was to say they wouldn't book a handyman, a plumber, a painter, a carpenter, a cleaner online? And I remember taking that pitch to, you know, dozens of VCs, and many of them just said, look, this will never happen. No one's ever going to go online and, book a home service, click a button and have a handyman show up. They're going to want to talk to them first. They're going to want to do this. They're going to want to do that. And, I guess those were the same people that passed on Uber and Airbnb and passed on Handy in terms of their investment. But I think that concept that you spot a trend, you spot something, you spot a cultural moment, and you say to yourself, how do I extrapolate that to other things that are going to happen? And now we take out these little, 5-inch bricks, and we do everything with them. We hold up our phone and we say, look, everything from, everything from banking to dating to, literally, there's not a thing we don't do. There's not many things that we don't do with these things. So, on the one hand, yes, we picked home services, but we could have picked anything. Like, we could have said, okay, how will this little brick apply to anything in life? And how will we, go and tackle what's like what the implications of that are. And the unemployment thing mattered because it was a real opportunity to match both sides. Like, I remember putting up the first, well, I'll talk about what it's like now. If you go and put up an ad now looking for a handyman or a cleaner, you get very few responses. Like, there's just so little demand for work because people have so many jobs. I remember putting up the first ad that said handyman wanted. I think it cost us like $8 or $9. This would have been back in 2011. Um, and that ad generated hundreds of responses. So for, you think about what the cost of bringing on, one of the things in marketplace is the cost to bring on participants into the marketplace. For $8 or $9, we were bringing on hundreds of people to say, hey, I want to work. Today, you put up an ad, you might get one response. So like it was the difference between cents, it was costing us, 5, 6, 7 cents to get someone say, I'm interested, versus today, it's like in the 20, 30, $40. And that matters when you're talking about bringing on, millions of participants into a marketplace. So I guess, the full loop on it is, it was the time we were in. Like, it was a product of the time of saying, how will the internet, how will this connectivity, how will peer-to-peer, how will distributed services affect a category? And it just happened that home services was the category that we chose.
It's an incredible story, and you're right. As you were talking there, yeah, like when you think back, it's not that long ago where people didn't want to put a credit card into the internet, even to buy a CD or travel. And then you move on to what you were saying in terms of the early Ubers, or the early Handy HQ as it was. and you know, that sort of trend, and be maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, and people passing on those things thinking this will never work. And of course, that's where we all ended up. So thank you for sharing that. And I did want to come back to the Angie story, because Angie in itself is a huge group. You ended up being the chief executive officer there for a number of years, and the chief product officer, if I'm right. What was that like? Were you looking to sell? Did they approach you? Was it a natural fit? How did that sort of come together? And you stayed there for a little while, didn't you?
So we had two businesses at Handy. Originally, it was all direct to consumer. Um, but as the business evolved, we developed a pretty important secondary line, which was selling through retail. So you would go to, a Walmart or a Target or a Costco, and you would look to buy furniture, either online or in store, or you'd look to buy a TV. And instead of just buying the TV and then finding someone to mount it right there on the buy page, right below the buy box that says buy it now, it would say buy it installed. And all of the installation for those services across Walmart, Target, Lowe's, Costco, dozens of other retailers, um, were actually powered by Handy. So Handy was doing the installation behind all those businesses. Um, and what that meant was we had a pretty important role in a pretty important strategic role in helping those businesses go to market with their product offering, against some of the other competitors who were also selling things as installed. Um, and as that became more strategically important, more people became interested in buying the business. And once we had, folks interested in buying the business, we had to take a step back. And obviously we had a board, we had investors, and we had all that fun stuff. And we had to take a look at what did it mean, who was interested. And we'd had a number of conversations with Angie over the years, Angie's List over the years, and ultimately they, we had multiple term sheets. Multiple people came forward and said, "Hey, we actually want to buy this business." And we took a step back and said, like, where's the best long-term home for it? Angie had a very complementary business that was different. It was more of a directory. It was more of a list. It was not about transactions. And we thought it was a good long-term home. So we agreed to sell the business to Angie. And as part of that, shortly thereafter, I took on running product at Angie, which was all of product, all of engineering. It was a few hundred people. And I still kept running Handy and built Handy continuously inside Angie. And then ultimately, in addition to being the CEO at Handy, I also became the CEO at the broader parent company at Angie. I ran that business for a few more years, and then ultimately decided that there was only so many 10-year blocks you get in your life, and I had overrun my 10-year block in the home services space at whatever. I started in 11 and finished in 22. So I was like, okay, I'm 11 or 12 years into this. It's time to draw a line under it. Otherwise, I'll wake up and not to say that it wasn't an amazing run, but all I would have done with my life was build a home service business, and I decided there was more I wanted to do. So yeah,
It's wonderful. Yeah, I really like that, Oisin, and thanks for sharing that. And I think just that phrase, you only get so many 10-year blocks in your life. I mean, that really does make you stop and think. And I suppose that brings us nicely up to Keychain. You took some time off, which, I think at that point you certainly earned and hopefully enjoyed, but you decided to put the toe back in the water. So what prompted that? What's the concept behind it? Where are you at with this new business? Because it's out of New York again, I believe, right? So what's happening at Keychain?
So look, I think when my co-founder from Handy, Omong, he also left a couple of weeks after I left Angie. So we both left at the same time, and he was the chief revenue officer at Angie. I was the CEO. And once we left, we agreed to take some time off, and I have two young kids, so I spent more time with kids, caught up on some health stuff I wanted to do, caught up on some travel I wanted to do, did a bunch of fun stuff. I think probably the travel highlight was I disappeared for 10 days left my wife and kids at home, and we all agreed I was just going to take a solo trip, and I actually spent most of it out in Japan, and I went skiing and snowboarding in Niseko, which was something that had been on my list for many years, and it was frankly one of the most amazing snow experiences I've ever had. I was exhausted at the end of every single day. I had these visions like I would ski or snowboard during the day and then, go for sushi and party at night and, drink too much and do stupid stuff. But actually what happened was I snowboarded during the day, came home, ate some dinner and passed out immediately because I was just so exhausted from walking up the mountain all day. But anyway, after I'd done that, I took a little bit more time and then fell into a routine or a rhythm with my former co-founder and co-founder again, where we would meet 2 or 3 days a week and we just talk about ideas. And in addition to that, I took some advice from somebody who said, look, I spoke to a bunch of founders who'd sold businesses before and took time off. They said, look, the best thing you can do is just give yourself space and spend some time with different people to get different perspectives. So I fell into a routine of having, 1 or 2 meetings a day, a lunch or breakfast or dinner with either founders or business folks or product people or engineers. And there had been, over the years, we've invested in 50 or 60 businesses. So we, had a constant list of like, hey, spin off things from those, which were like, okay, like what do we look at doing? Will we build that? Will we not? So when I left Angie, we probably had 5 or 6 ideas, and we just kind of let them percolate and let them compete with each other. And we tested some. We put a little bit of money into doing customer research, and we met with more customers for various ideas. And this idea for Keychain just kept hanging around. It just wouldn't die. Like most of these things just die after a while, which is great because you can just like let them go. Be like, oh, well, that one didn't work. Or I'm less passionate about it. Or you get enough negative signal from the market that it's not a good idea. So you just drop it. Whereas this one just wouldn't die. And that's a good sign, right? We kept like, on the one hand, the more research you do, the more the more conviction you'll get. On the other hand, the more research you do, the more you're going to find people who'll say like, this is a terrible idea, don't do it, or I'd never buy this. And the thing we did with Keychain was we spent time with brands initially to say, look, do you find it hard to find manufacturers? And universally, every brand says, oh my goodness, it's the biggest problem I have. I can't find a manufacturer for my product. The manufacturers I do have, they let me down. They're so hard. They're in the wrong place. I'm trying to expand. They don't do the product the way I want. They won't put in the right packaging format. And this is, everything from people making, food product that goes on the shelf to beverages to, pretty much all of CPG. And we said, well, look, that's interesting and, definitely, a problem for you, but I don't know if it's a business. And what we did from there was we said, look, small brands have problems finding manufacturers, but maybe that's not interesting. Maybe that's because they're small and nobody wants their business. But actually, let's go talk to some big brands. We thought, like, who are the biggest brands that outsource their manufacturing? And we realized pretty quickly it was private label. So these are the Walmarts and Targets and Costco's and Tesco's of the world, or Aldi's and Lidl's of the world. And they run these enormous portfolios of private label product. You think about some of the bigger ones, they have 3, 4, 5,000 products across everything from, own brand milk to yogurt, to salt, to pepper, to, literally most of the products in the store, they'll say, hey, we have to have our own branded version of it. And you would think those guys can't have a problem finding manufacturers. Everybody must want to work with them because they know if they launch a product, it's going to sell. Like, the big retailers don't launch products unless they know that they have the demand for them. They see a branded version selling and they say, look, well, let's make a private label version of that. And so we went and we spoke to them. We said, look, do you find it hard to find manufacturers? And they said, oh my goodness, it's such a challenge. We have 3,000 products. We're supposed to have at least 2 manufacturers for all of them because of, we need to have dual source supply. We're not allowed to have, at more than X% of our business with any one supplier because then we have supplier concentration risk. And then there's all this compliance and yada, yada, yada. And I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, that sounds like you've got a problem. But just calm down. So we then had validated one side of the market. And then the second place we went to, the other side of the market, was we went to the manufacturers and we said, look, do you find it hard to get business? Like, these guys are all looking to find you. Like, why can you not be found? And they said, well, look, we work with brokers, we work at trade shows, but yeah, there's not a single place we can go to find where brands and retailers are looking for us. And there's a lot of complexity here. Like, we're obviously grossly oversimplifying it in this conversation, but there's like real complexity around the processes that go into making something, whether you've got the right certification, whether you're in the right location, whether you produce at the right quantity level, whether, you know, you're able to produce certain mixes of product. So the more we got into that, the more we the more we realize, okay, there's a real matching problem here. There's a real marketplace problem. And those are the kind of problems we like. Like, we like those problems where there's two sides of a market who are trying to figure out how to meet. It's kind of like a homeowner trying to find a contractor, or, you know, a plumber trying to find the right customer to work with. And we picked apart the problem, and we started to build more conviction on it. And I think one of the most important things you can do, it's identify the things you have to believe to be true, you know, when you're starting a business. It's do the research on whether they're true. It's look at the research objectively. But the last part, I think, is one of the most important parts. And it's where I think most people, you know, drop the ball a little bit. It's to give it time. So it's actually, once you've done all that, don't just say, I found this thing, let's go. It's to actually give yourself time with the data to reflect on it. Give it time to compete against something else. So, you know, at no point until, you know, very late in the day were we committed to Keychain as the idea. There were many other things that we were allowing it to compete with, because, you know, you think about the average person starting a business, they're typically in a job, right? They're in a job and they're either unhappy with the job, and the option is to stay in the job that they're unhappy with, or to go and do idea X. And on any given day, idea X will probably feel better than the job that they're in because their boss was mean to them, or their commute sucked that day, or whatever, something like they lost a customer, something went wrong. And if the only choice you have is stay in job X, or stay in the job or do idea X, then it always feels like a better idea to do idea X. But really what you want to do is you want to create competition between idea X and idea Y, or idea X, Y, and Z, so that you're truly evaluating not so much the concept of stay where I am or go somewhere else. It's stay where I am or go do one of these other things. And that's the way in which the idea gets stronger. So we really did keep multiple ideas on the go until quite late in the day, in our ideation process. And, you know, I looked at lots of other things. Like, I looked at general partner roles at venture funds that I, you know, had some offers for. I had opportunity to go run later stage private companies. I had a couple of public companies inbound. So I looked at all those things, and ultimately, we were also trying to buy a business. So there were a couple of businesses we got close on buying. We had some term sheets out to buy something. But ultimately, this opportunity just kept grabbing us and saying, like, no, there's really something quite powerful here. You can really make a difference in the supply chain. And, you know, you think about what that means. Obviously, there's great economics, and we think we can, you know, build a business that has longevity and has great shareholder returns. But also, you know, you think about the decades and decades that have gone into trying to get people to eat healthier food. And pretty much all we've done for decades is say, you should spend more time in the fruit and vegetable aisle. You should eat fresh foods, and you should go exercise. And the reality is, you go to a grocery store, and 80% of the grocery store is not that. 80% of the grocery store is packaged goods. So we're like, well, why do we keep telling people to go spend more time in the 20% of the grocery store that's good for them, when there's 80% of the grocery store that's less good for them? Why don't we just try and make the 80% of the grocery store better? And when we got into that, we started to say, like, well, the way in which you'll make that better, if you believe people are good, and I genuinely believe most people are good and they want to do the right thing, and it's the actual incentive structure we put around them that causes people to go off the rails. Then the problem is it's so hard for people to put product on the shelf and get product made. The lead cycles are so long, the risks are so high, the costs are so high that when it comes down to it, and someone at a store, a grocery store is saying, hey, I'm going to make a private label version of this, I could make a better for you version, or I could make a version that's laced with salt and sugar and fat, and I know it's going to sell, or I could try for a better for you version that's lower in those things, but I'm not quite sure if I'll get the marketing mix right and it'll actually, fly off the shelf. They opt for the safer choice because we've made it so hard. So our thesis is that if we can actually make it easier to put product on the shelf and we can highlight the businesses doing that in a healthy way, that actually we can try make the 80% of the grocery store a little bit healthier by impacting the massive supply chain of thousands and thousands of manufacturers and hundreds of billions of dollars that goes into making the product that actually fills 80% of the store. So you put all those pieces together and it becomes a pretty attractive idea and a pretty important part of the food we eat is a really important part of our lives. So I think it's like an important business that should be built.
I really like that. Thank you so much indeed for sharing that insight, Oisin, because you've taken us from the slopes in Japan, to crashing out and an evening being exhausted through to, this complex area that you're bringing together through Keychain, but also the mission behind it and what you're really teasing out there. And it sounds like, a huge opportunity, hugely complex, but also what a great opportunity. And I really like one of the things that you said about it's not about just checking both sides and analyzing the data. It's allowing that to sit for a while, to reflect on it, to see how it competes against other ideas. And it brings me back to something that you said earlier. This thing just wouldn't die, and it just seems like the data just kept building and it just became like, we have to do this kind of thing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it brings me on to the last couple of things I want to ask you, which is, so as you forward from now, what does the next year look like for you then? Because it seems like you've certainly got your work cut out. This thing seems to have an awful lot to do. So what does the next year look? What's on your roadmap? What you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah. I like to reflect at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, at the end beginning, uh, and try and list out some of the goals and some of the personal things, the professional things, the family things that I want to do. One of my family goals this year is I want to take my 3 and 5 year old on a camping trip. And I have not figured out where or when. I think I'm going to wait for the weather to turn a little bit. I think it's about, -6 or 7 Celsius today. So I should probably wait for it to turn. I think the kids on the walk to school were complaining about the cold, so I probably won't make them sleep outside in this, even if I would give them sleeping bags. But one of my goals this year is to take my kids on a camping trip, and I guess I'm sharing that more publicly to force me to do it. So that if we ever have another version of this, you'll be like, hey, did you do the camping trip? I'm like, yes I did. I'll tell you why it was a good bad, what I learned from it. Professionally and for Keychain, uh we've got things in a really interesting nascent stage at the moment. So we've got about 40 odd, maybe 50 people working on it. We've raised a good chunk of money to build it. So we raised about $18 million of capital. We've got initial customers signed up, both manufacturers, brands, retailers, and we're in the process of releasing a first version of the product in the next few weeks. So look, whenever you release a product, it's both amazing and terrifying all at the same time. People definitely don't do what you expect with it, no matter how much testing you do, no matter how much beta testing and alpha testing you do. When you release it out, unexpected things happen, particularly with marketplaces. So we're both eager, excited, and a little bit anxious to see, like, okay, how are people going to use this product? How will the users engage with it? And I'm sure they'll do things that we didn't expect. Like, that's just par for the course, in both a good way and a bad way. We will definitively know more, a couple of months from now than we know today. And that'll really impact um, what the roadmap for the rest of the year for Keychain looks like. We certainly have strong conviction on certain things that we're going to need to invest in around transactions, around payments, around quality. Um, but I think some of the forks in the road are around how quickly do we internationalize, how important are other categories. We're starting with food and beverage. How important is it to expand into cosmetics? How important is it to look at personal care? How important is it to look at household? And then what's the role international plays in terms of Mexico, Canada are the logical places to go next. But there are other parts of the supply chain that are also important. So, the rest of the year for Keychain is definitely about getting real real initial traction on the core product, and then figuring out where we expand from there. And yeah, I think we'll feel differently when we start to get real input on it. That's live, as opposed to the more theoretical feedback we've gotten thus far. So yeah.
Yeah, it's that real world sort of beta, isn't it? That all that juicy information comes in, and as you say, best laid plans and how people use it. But just as you're describing there, obviously that whether it's Canada or Mexico or the whole international element, I would imagine this is a universal challenge for lots of communities, lots of countries, lots of areas. And as you say, whether it's cosmetics or grocery, or whether it's you name it, you name the sort of area where there's a manufacturing process involved. I can understand on the smaller medium-sized businesses, because maybe they don't have the volumes, they can't get the price they need, they're looking for the particular type. But those large retailers, you were talking about that dual supply issue that they need. Then there's the making sure that it arrives on time. There's the, is it at the right price? Can they do it to the specification that we need? And then you're sort of enhancing that, your mission and your sort of vision for how Keychain plays a part to make things better, not just for them, but make for everybody. And I really admire that. Thank you for sharing that sort of. You've certainly got your work cut out of the next year, that's for sure.
Simon, do you want to, you explain this better than I do. Do you want to join us, and you can do some you can do some of the work for us and spreading the good word and what we're doing?
Sounds great. It sounds like a plan. Look, the last thing I need to ask you before we do run out of time is there anything else you want to share with our international audience while we have them here today? Anything you want to double down on? Anything you want to recap on? Or maybe something new that we haven't touched on? And secondly, and importantly, if people want to find out more about Keychain or the things that you're involved in, where's the best place to point them to?
Sure. So I think we've gone a around the world tour here in terms of topics we've covered. I guess I'd wrap with a more personal reflection, which is, I think that we all have things that we believe. So whether it's our own personal values, or whether it's ways in which we want to live our lives, or the things that are important to us, um, I think the more we can write those things down, the better. I think it gives us a lot more clarity. It forces thought. It forces articulation. It forces you to be more specific. And I think one of the best exercises we ever did as parents was before our first was born. We wrote down our parenting principles, and we said, like, these are the things that we have around, like, parenting, and these are the things we believe in, and these are the things we don't believe in. And it's not so much about the output. Yes, the output's important in that occasionally when we're, unsure what to do, we pull it out and we're like, hey, did we actually litigate this before? Or did we, like, consider this before? But it really just, the exercise of doing it and having a conversation about it with your partner, I think, was just very, very helpful. So, in your own life, I think it makes sense just to write down the things you believe, and okay, you don't need to look at them every day or every week or even every month, but on some cadence to pull it out and say like, hey, am I living my life in accordance with the things that I believe? I think to be a powerful exercise. And, doing it in your head, I don't think works. I think you actually have to write these things down. Um, so yeah, I think that's probably a last reflection. And then if you're looking to find me, I'm all over the place. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also go to keychain.com, or you can email me at o@keychain.com.
Well, that's perfect. And that brings us nicely to the end of this episode with Oisin here on the Global Discussion. I just want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to us on this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to help support the show. Also, go and check out keychain.com, find out all the great stuff that's coming very, very soon. So, congratulations, Oisin. Continued success to you and family and the business. And I will be keeping an eager eye and checking in. It'd be great maybe to come back in a little while and maybe we do another one of these and we'll see how things are working out. It sounds really exciting. So thank you so much indeed. I hope people can join us again for more discussions with creators and leaders and thinkers just like Oisin. Thank you, Oisin. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Simon. You did a great job. Great host, best host.